All right. Well, as you know, I was spending a lot of time coming up with these fancy scenes. You saw my crazy setup, and I don't know. It's I've oh, there we go. Now you're not dead. But I've settled on this one screen that people can enjoy, and it is just going to be. I'm going to use. You can't see it, unfortunately, but it's just going to be some of the slides that you were using. Now, here is my first question. Now, you're one of these people who does the hand drawn slide stuff, right? Which I think is delightful. What When did you like start doing that? When were you like, you know what? I'm just gonna hand draw my slides.
I kept doing the same pitch a couple of times, extending on my slides again and again. To a certain point, I figured out that people were not listening to me, but they were just looking at those shiny little diagrams on the slides on
Mm.
everything. I had the idea that to make it easier to understand, to have a little bit more of interaction, because on slides it's really tough to change things on demand and to deep dive on some elements that are just displayed there. That it would be great to start to have some whiteboard to be able to have something more interactive, as if we were in the same place, talking a little bit about the matter that is the dearest to the heart of the people we engage with. And I would say, as I joined Pivotal 2 years ago, I had this idea in my mind to get rid of slides and just start drawing a little bit, making it more engaging. And this is when I started. I used to be a very visual person anyway, so I'm really enjoying doing the session. Probably I'm a little bit like you. I tend to talk too much, a lot, as you highlighted it yesterday.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's sometimes tough to find the right moment just to stop, draw, and just
It's true. It's true. No, so yeah, we were in a an EBC. I'm always fond of talking about EBCs in this weird area. Or fond, it comes up a lot. But yeah, I think it's like the first time that you and I have worked on one of those together. And yeah, yeah. I had an evening event with James Waters yesterday as well, and he was. I had to thank him afterwards. I had to be like, I'm really glad you. I said interjected instead of interrupted, but I'm really glad you interjected several times because otherwise I'm just like this wall of words that concretes the conversation. I don't know what is that. Why? Why do you can be my therapist here for a little bit? Why do I and maybe sometimes you? What are we doing there? Why are we just like pushing through this wall of words? What help cure me? What do I need to do to be more to as we see? I'm doing it now. You see, to have, as we like to say, I'd like to keep this conversation interactive. How do I move to that?
mhm. Yeah, I felt that. So I'm completely understanding you. Have the same symptoms very often. As I joined the company last year, someone told me we should always remind that we have two ears and just one mouth,
Mm.
and it probably has. There is probably a very good reason for that. So probably leveraging pauses on. At the end, what you want to achieve through those talks is really to better understand what are the pain points, what are the problems, what is the approach, what are the brilliant ideas the people have we are working with, and try to show them how maybe we can help them moving forward, saving some time, saving some money, being more efficient at what they do, using different approaches.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think that definitely. I mean, you hit on something that only recently. I mean, in the last week or so, maybe even last few days, I've kind of crystallized is like, I think I think what I need to do in these meetings, and then I think I was talking about this yesterday in my daily thing here, is I should probably just have one slide for these presentations that says this would be an ironic, funny way of saying it, and kind of a idiomatic thing in English, but it's sort of like, "What's your problem?" Right? Like because that and in the genuine meaning of that, like I feel like a lot of the meetings maybe that you get involved in perhaps, but definitely that I get involved in, there's kind of two things going on there. One, there is people just finding out what it is we do and us finding out what they do, right? Like that's always an important thing as a vendor is you're kind of, you're trying to figure out if this relationship is going to work out, what's going to happen. But I feel like the other thing that I always want to get to and that I think the audience wants to get to is just like, let's just talk about the problems that you have, right? Like what issues do you have? Like we kind of all know the technology stuff and what'll happen. But like, how about you've got some issue unless you just came here to take a nap. So let's just start with that, right? Like never mind software, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right. But like, what's really the issue? And I feel like it's kind of unfortunate because in the standard kind of businessy conversations that I have, we don't really get till that at the end when there's like only 5 minutes left. So I don't know. Man, it'd be hard to kind of jumpstart that though, just to be like, hi, I'm Michael. I work at VMware Tanzu. What's your problem?
Yeah, you might starting this way, you might end talking about a lot of different topics, not
Yeah,
only maybe the thing you are more specialized on it. And this is where I think it's great always to try to set the scene a little bit up front.
yeah,
But you are right, trying to figure out what is the issue in those discussions is key to be able to understand and identify potential value. While on changing directions, bring new sparkles of ideas at the end for the customers interacting with us. Very often, what I figure out is for me, the problems that we see are in a completely different nature that's what the customer thinks it is. Very
mm,
often the discussions we have are a purely technological level, like how can I use Kafka streaming to implement event sourcing to have a more modern application?
yeah,
Where in the reality, as you mentioned it also yesterday, to be successful at that, it has nothing to do with technology. Technology is really secondary. Figured out that sometimes it creates even a little bit more problems, and it makes it so difficult to make 1-2 steps back and try to have a look at what do we really want to achieve by building a modern application or by modernizing the existing ones. And yesterday also we had a look a little bit at those different trends that we see. Customers love to talk about cloud adoption, which is absolutely fantastic technology. It's a huge help for many companies in many perspectives. Talking also about a newer architecture, changing the way they build applications are more efficient, changing the way they collaborate, changing the way that they leverage the power of machine in the application to be more efficient, to be more pragmatic. But this is not typically what they really want to achieve from a business perspective.
yeah.
Repeating 20 times the word Kubernetes, a container, is not necessarily providing more value to the users. And coming to that is always making the link and making this step back is not always very easy.
Yeah, yeah, no, you raised many good points there. Well, I realized I didn't have you introduce yourself. Why don't you
Oh,
introduce yourself?
yeah. Good idea. So my name is Marc Zottner. I'm French, living in Germany for a very long time. I'm working in the technology office within VMware Pivotal Labs. As a kid, I always wanted to become archaeologist, to become then an architect. And I very recently figured out that I fulfilled those dreams in IT, spending most of my time during the past 13 years helping customers doing application modernization, application transformation, in many different roles, from developer, architect, consultant, trainer, technical lead, program lead, project lead, and so on and so forth. So I'm totally passionate about the modernization of application landscapes.
So wait. You said you wanted to be an archaeologist? That's
Absolutely.
amazing. Yeah, yeah. What? I don't even know. Like, what would you be an archaeologist of? If you
In
when
fact, as a kid, it was very precise. I was extremely interested by everything related to Egyptology. So I had,
yes,
normal kids maybe were interested by other things. I had a lot of booklets around Ramses and Tutankhamun and all those. I don't really know why I felt attracted to that, but probably seeing the idea of being able to establish a connection to something having existed something like 3,000 years, 4,000
yeah.
years. ago. I found it absolutely mind blowing, and I'm still fascinated by that in a way. If you think about it in our jobs, maybe we relate to applications and components that have been conceived 20, 10, 15 years ago. And it's a little bit the same thing. I really love to be beamed in the past and to better understand the mindsets. Why have the things been built the way they have been built? And uh, I
Yeah,
still find it fascinating.
yeah, no, no, no. I mean, I think I forget the word for it, but if you like are a Egyptologist or whatever, there is like no, I was thinking that it's fascinating because it's like a big, well, to put it in a joking way, it was a big deal, right? Like, so it was a very very interesting like world civilization affecting civilization on its own with all sorts of like weird in a good way, but like fascinating parts of it and everything. But also like, um, yeah, and I guess it's also like knowable. That's another thing that's like is good about history is if you can actually discover things about it, right? If there's traces left of it. But then also the other thing you raise is like it was so long ago that it's crazy. It's hard to even imagine that anything existed that long ago. Like my son wants to be a paleontologist. He's all into the dinosaurs, and every now and then, when I'm not thinking about digital transformation, I think like I mean, I'm I believe in science, but I don't know if I believe that was like 30 million years ago. I don't even know what that means. 30 million years ago. Like that is so crazy. Like that's a really long waiting room to be in between the dinosaurs and now.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's nuts.
Absolutely. It's very humbling to have a chance to have perspective to the past, and it helps also to make one, two steps back to what we do today. As I studied in France, one of the teacher was saying in IT, 3 years is a decade. And if you have a look at it from this perspective, maybe
Yeah.
applications on things we are working on modernizing today, maybe are from the Iron Age in a way, or from several centuries ago, for normal people, normal life. I find it always very fascinating to be able to understand the whole context around the reason why things have been built, on establishing this connection and building the empathy at the end. There is no bad applications. There is no sometimes I've done dozens and dozens of application transformation projects, and sometimes you just step in on see something very very terrible where you just can understand why from many different perspectives an application has been designed the way it was designed, sending in JavaScript some SQL requests against a database, something like that. I think making one or two steps back, trying to get some more empathy for the time the application has been built, helps a lot to not only understand the persons you're working with, but also to find a way moving forward. Because it's not gonna be solved just by popping up on some technological thingies and just combining them, playing Legos with components. But it needs to be handled holistically, having a look at the methodologies that are used, the culture, how can we make it evolve to provide a better experience for the developers, to get more quality, to get constantly new value in production, using tools that are meant to be used for high productivity, on combining that with the platform perspective as well. So.
Yeah, I think that idea of having empathy to understand why at the time it was a great idea to embed SQL in a web page, so to speak. like like is yeah, it's often overlooked, and yeah, it is interesting to think of like archaeology and architecture and modernization, because I always feel like, and you do a lot more of this than I do, but one of the things that makes modernizing applications so difficult and tedious is like understanding what someone was trying to do in the first place, right? Like,
Mhm.
and not only understanding what they were doing so you can keep doing it, but also so that you can maybe like revise it and change it around. And like you're reminding me of, this is not exactly in the application area, but I remember hearing someone at a large organization saying that they were rewriting like a decades old stack of things, and there was all this like compliance and rules that they were having to make sure that they were still following. And they went back and read them, and they realized that many of them just like didn't apply. Like it was just like, when you fax something, you must do this. And then they're like, well, we're not faxing things anymore. And so they started to sort of like not implement those things and see if anyone complained. and so it's sort of like not only understanding what the original intention was, but like you've got to go back and revisit the assumptions that you have, which is, I don't know, a tremendous amount of work. Now going back before I remembered to have you introduce yourself, you were saying something about, when we go and we talk with people and you help them see things differently. And you were making me like, I'm always like playing around with this idea. The saying is, as you were evoking, is that technology's not the problem, culture is the problem. And I'm often thinking like, I think I even said this yesterday in the meeting we were in, is like, don't misunderstand that technology is very hard, right? Like the technology is difficult as well. It's just this other thing is difficult. And I think, one way of talking about that, that you're making me think, is I'm always curious how technology makes solving cultural problems different or easier, right? Because like we spend a lot of time talking about in kind of our business, like, you've got to change the organization and it's hard to change people. But I feel like, and I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, maybe you can, but like,
Mhm.
I feel like there's plenty of technologies that come about all the time, ones that we have now that actually make it possible, if not easier, to solve kind of cultural process and organization issues. And I guess I guess compliance might be one of those, right? Like the idea of being able to automate things or like really lock down what you can put in a container, to pick something very
Mhm.
small, potentially can solve a lot of culture issues, a lot of bureaucracy issues when it comes to like that being an opaque system that you can't
Mhm.
look into. But I don't know, that's a new framing to kind of think about things, and is how can we actually use technology to solve these immovable things in the past?
Yeah, I think the path from technologies to solving a solution is not very obvious most of the time, especially with the emergence of newer, I would say, more fundamental type of technology. So like in core physics, where they invent new things and figure out things in mathematics, and it takes sometimes years to find a concrete application. I think
Hmm.
in the world you are evolving, we have very strong similarities here too, where it's very tough to find to connect at the end those new technology, new frameworks, new things that are emerging to a concrete use case, bringing value
Yeah.
to users, to customers. And this is at the end, from my understanding, the whole purpose of the whole lean product management dimension, trying to figure out what is explores as a problem space, understand today, independently of this beautiful technology, let's make a step back. Let's try to figure out today what is the biggest problem that you are encountering with the customers that you are facing. Maybe you are a bank and you have to expose thousands of APIs externally to the internet, and you are expecting a tremendous load in terms of requests on your core banking systems. Um, Maybe your system is not stable enough and you want to just create a new mobile application and provide new services to users. I think the art is really the exploration of those problem space to better understand what's going to make the biggest impact
Mm.
to your users, to your customers, what's going to provide them value. It's very easy, from my experience, to use yourself trying to figure that out. And the problem is the same if you want to develop a new product, or if you have an existing application, let's say a more monolithical type of mainframe or core system, and you want to evolve it. I would say, in the case of an existing application, even a little bit tougher, because you have a lot of restrictions, you have a lot of constraints preventing you to do whatever you would love to do if you start with a blank page. Here too, the only, if you make a step back, I think the true real approach to that is to try to use a different mindset than the mindset that has been used to create the problems that you try to solve. I don't want to paraphrase Einstein or something like that, but I find it extremely powerful. If you have a look at it, we had a recent customer. We have been working on modernizing one of them really mainframes. It's a huge government customers servicing millions of customers in Europe, millions of users. They had this really mainframe at the heart of the business. Written in COBOL, they were struggling to get new developers. They tried 3 times to move away from this application that was built in a time where it was absolutely fine to have it conceived this way. It failed because they use the same mindset, this waterfall approach, to re-architect, to rebuild this very same application. And this is not really working. It's something we see a lot. We call it analysis paralysis. You can spend months, years trying to figure out what's going to be my meta model, my meta architecture for my applications. And you spend so much time designing it that at the moment where you start transforming, you're first a little bit puzzled to find the right spot in your macro architecture picture to start. You cannot, you would typically spend years also just starting to rewrite it and then transitioning from the one to the other. It's very, very tough. And this is where our customers have found a lot of help in those lean methodologies, trying just to focus on one thing, trying to understand what is the biggest problem, trying to have a look at the application, not looking at its past, looking back, trying to analyze the documentation, trying to analyze the code, but more understanding the core application from a business perspective, using domain-driven design techniques like event storming, bringing everyone in one room, using a lot of those stickies to model the different events happening from a business side of things in the application, and use that as a basis to design the application the way it would have loved to be designed if we would have crafted it today from zero. So we have applied such techniques a couple of times very successfully with customers to help them to move away from those very, very monolithic mainframe and start step by step evolving those to something providing values, solving also all those issues they're encountering from a non-functional perspective, systemic failures, maintainability, flexibility, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think I've never. I assume it's a pleasure, but I've never had the pleasure of like working, doing one of those workshops with the sticky notes that we do in various types of things. But it's an interesting process of like, I'm hesitating because like, so on the one hand, like whenever someone's like, what are we trying to do here? I always think like, oh boy, here goes this again. Right. Like, like, like we don't need to like, reinvent the universe. But I think, from what I've seen of the work we've done with, the sticky note work we've done, so to speak, is it gets to part of what you were saying earlier, is it's a really effective exercise to go in when you have too big of a problem. Because when you have this giant, maybe 5-10-year-old thing, right, or even not a piece of software, but just a process, a part of the business or a bureaucracy that's functioning, like it's easy to kind of forget like what were we doing here, and like not only what were we doing here, but like what do we want to do now. And I think I've kind of started to find that doesn't, it kind of goes back to me saying like I should just have that one slide that says what's your problem. Is it seems like people don't always make enough time to really ask what the point of what they're doing is. And not to be like, the Simon Sinek why thing and really like, think about your place in the universe as a corporation, but just like, yeah, I mean, all we're really doing here is like when someone transfers money from a bank account, we want them to be able to determine if they get a paper receipt of that or not. And we don't really need to worry about all this other stuff. I mean, that was an overly simple example, but it is like it's and then the other thing you were saying there that I've been trying to emphasize more because I realized it's part of that is that like I'm pretty sure, as you were just saying, what you should do is just like pick something really small and do that. And like if you're worried about what you're going to do after that, don't do that. Just like pick something small and do it, right? Because like you have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. And like there's all these things that you're going to encounter. And you really are going to get stuck in that analysis paralysis and, not actually deliver anything. I mean, I guess you might deliver something, but it's going to not be valuable. Like I'm remembering, I can't even remember what company it was, which is good. But we get involved in a lot of these meetings where it's just sort of like, such and such big company is kicking off their building a new data center for the next 5 years. And it's like, 30 to 50 million dollars or euro spend. And so we got to get in there and talk about how we can fit into that. And then, there's always some giant strategy spreadsheet and like picture that they have. And they're like, we're rolling this out. And oftentimes I just want to be like, why don't you just like rewrite your store finder application first, right? Like, are you really going to like need all of this stuff? Like, this is like, it's a lot of planning to do ahead of time. And then to make like a 5-year commitment to a choice sounds awesome if you pick us. But like, that's a pretty big like commitment to make. That's a big bet to make instead of being a little more flexible in how you're going about doing things. I don't know. People just think too big.
Yeah. Yes, 5 years is probably 20 years in normal world outside IT. So
Right. Yeah, even more
it's
so. Yeah.
extremely tough to have any form of visibility about what's going to change, what's going to happen, especially in those troubled times. At the end, out of 5 years, they could probably spend just 1 year trying to figure out what just to do with which application.
Exactly.
Very often it's purely just focused on the technology, just thinking in terms of data centers, how many servers do we want, which application is going there, which is something that is not necessarily bringing some value for them, not improving anything. So, as a joint pivot, I heard a lot of times, every single time we talk about those lift and shift, someone saying from somewhere, it's like putting some lipstick on a pig.
Sure.
Just those pure modernization are not necessarily tied to an increase in terms of value. And this is where I found it crucial to get a better understanding of the portfolio very quickly without spending a huge amount of time having a look at every single bit of documentation, but having just enough to be able to start to have a plan to figure out at the end which application do we want to transform first, which one do we want to modernize first, which one are we expecting not to provide any form of value because it's a very generic service, because it's end of life, because it's not used that often, it's not going to disrupt the business and help the company to grow. Figuring out also what are we going to do with which application, which is very often a question that is not asked, but it does not make sense to pick any application and to transform it in its better self, to have like every application being the most perfect of the world, the most maintainable, the cleanest one, using the greatest technologies, using all keywords and buzzwords that you can figure out. It doesn't make sense. And it's all about figuring out what should we do with which application, which one should we maybe just lift and shift, rehost, doing as few changes as possible, which one maybe we want to replatform, maybe changing some underlying frameworks, replacing a very old Java JDK by something a bit more modern, moving away from the Java EE specification or Jakarta EE specification to something really lean, standard, used by millions of developers like Spring Boot, and so on and so forth, thinking in terms of bringing your application to a container. Or moving forward, thinking at how could we refactor, we architecture a little bit our applications to fully benefit from the new modern world, to make it easy to scale, to make it more stable, which is in many sectors one of the number one demand, or just to be faster in changing, experimenting, providing new services to end users. And
So what are like, I mean, whether they're named, more than likely unnamed, like what are some examples of that where you know of, or you've worked, or you kind of talk with people about uh, sorting the applications to care about, right? Like how, I don't know, like what are some types of applications or services that people have sorted out and decided to modernize or not modernize?
yeah. So this is one of the topics we are engaging a lot with our customers. I think one of the latest example I have in my mind was with a telco provider in the UK, where they had thousands of applications and were really struggling to build such a plan, such a roadmap. And we started to have a discussion. So from an application perspective, you had everything from the little .NET application, just a link, just opening is a notepad to add some comments, to the mainframe type of RPG, PL, procedural applications being very, very monolithic. On where we started was first to understand which business outcomes do they want to achieve. In that case, it was move from one data center to another one, and they wanted to figure out which applications they could just directly move to the cloud instead of just fiddling with the new virtualized environment and having to plan a little bit more of space in the data center to bring those applications.
And then I mean, just so why did they want to move it to the cloud? Was it like what was motivating that?
It was to reduce the size of the data centers. They had over 10,000
Mm.
hosts, 700 applications that we analyzed, and more hundreds and hundreds of additional applications. And they want to figure out what is the right fit for which application should be maybe kept on an IaaS level, which one maybe a good fit for containers, which one should better be developed on an application platform, and so on and so forth.
So
On being
was that like a matter of like cost and better performance? Like why you would want to move it in the first
Yeah.
place?
So the priority was definitely cost,
Yeah.
which is sadly, from my perspective, too often the first start for discussion, because there's the other perspective of reducing, increasing the stability, scalability, improving the security of the application, improving the speed in which you just bring your product to market, or you develop, or you do your operation, are typically also a great source of value for the customers. Here it was indeed at the very beginning more focused on the cost side of things.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, it's
they
easy
wanted
to
to
measure, right? Like
and
it's
yeah, and they wanted to figure out basically where should they start. And here basically we came up with our approach, building buckets of applications, applications being very similar, using the same language framework and so on and so forth, being put in one bucket. And for all those buckets, when it was possible, we conducted a little bit of automated application analysis with tools that we have built to better understand how cloud native, cloud ready are those applications, or container ready are those applications. How tough is it going to be to transform those? Capturing also for each bucket through discussions with different departments, what value very precisely beyond cost are they expecting to reach out on. Out of that, of work that took around 4 or 5 weeks, we build them a plan and a recommendation on something we call a funnel, telling basically which applications are good candidates for which type of environment, on which strategy would we recommend moving forward in the future. Yeah. And
that
it helped.
as a I mean that's I that makes sense. It's a very consultation heavy sort of thing where you go and visit with people and kind of like, it's like the archaeological thing, except present day. I guess that's sociology, where you're studying things that are still alive,
Absolutely.
and I guess humans that are still alive. Otherwise, it might be biology or other ologies. Iology? Anyways, I guess iology would be the study of yourself. But like Yeah, I mean, it pulls together a lot of what we've been talking about, where you find out, is it worth doing anything with this?
Mhm.
What do you actually want with it? And then I think there's another part that, like, it's hard as a vendor or a consultant who's trying to get paid to solve your problems to then also judge things on viability, to sort of be like, no, this can't be solved. Right? Or like this is not really worth
Yeah.
solving, and like it technically doesn't work out. Yeah, and I think, the other aspect to that, like when we do this, we tend to emphasize doing very what seems like short cycles, right? Like 6 to 10 week
Mhm.
cycles for doing things, and like what? How does that work operationally? Like what sort of constraint? I mean, that introduces a constraint of time, but like what does that constraint sort of like force you to do? Like there's
Yeah.
a reason you keep it
Mm.
so short, but I wonder like what kind of positive forces do you think that has?
I think keeping it so short forces you to constantly just be focused on the most important thing, making sure we are not losing time, having a look at things that are not important, talking too much about technologies, but really making sure also that when we engage, we are extremely well prepared. That we have a really good plan. 4 weeks is nothing in comparison to the week of a whole application, the life of a whole application. And it forces us to be really focused on what I've been quite amazed by the whole methodologies coming from Pivotal Labs, working for over 30 years on user-centric design, lean product management, extreme programming is a wide variety of methodologies and tools and practices that are available to really extremely quickly focus, keep everyone focused on the most essential things that you want to do. And it's beautiful to see how at many different levels those techniques are coming together
Mm.
to, in a very short amount of time, being able to achieve things that spent typically our customers spend months doing. Um, a good example for that was one other monolith modernization project we have been engaging on, where a customer spent more or less 10, 11 months um, to build a master plan, to figure out, this is at the heart of a business. This software is generating a turnover of over 1 billion euro. We cannot scale. We are at the limit of the Oracle database. We really need to do something. And they spend that amount of time to build a plan, to figure out basically where should they start, how the ideal application should look like. And they already had done a lot of those event storming exercise, and we stick to a method to validate what they've done. So it's a matter of 2 days. We just follow this very well defined format of methodologies that are applied to gain the insights, to validate what they have done, and then step by step keep the focus on what's going to generate the strongest value for them.
Mm.
And there is no black magic. It's just a series of methodology building on each other. We understand the business through this event storming exercise. Then we figure out of the whole picture, where do we have the biggest problem? Selecting something we call a thin slice of the application. And then step by step, we define with a very concrete methodology our ideal notional architecture that we would build today if we would just craft this application from scratch. And those are very well defined methodologies that are fine tuned, that are constantly improved, that we use as well on site. But also we have for all those methodologies some remote equivalents. We are a huge fan, a huge user of Miro to have all the stickies digitalized, to have all this modeling there, and to also save some trees to avoid, to produce some to make
Yeah,
tests.
they added that to our I don't know what you would call it, our SSO, the wonderful VMware Horizon Workspace One or something, and so I logged into that the other day, and it is a crazy weird tool. It's basically just like a gigantic whiteboard that you can have structured and unstructured things
Mm.
on that get
Yeah.
saved somewhere in the cloud. But it seems like That would be interesting. Like it's, I tried to kind of figure out like how I would use this, and then I realized I was suffering from. I'm sure you have this problem. Most people in computers do, where you're just like, ooh, a new tool. This is going to save my life and make it better. And then you like sink a couple days of free time into it, and you're like, I'm just going to go back to using the old tools. But you're constantly evaluating
Absolutely.
it. So you're reminding me of a question. We might have even been asked this one yesterday, but that comes up a lot is, especially with modernization and large organizations, people always ask, basically whether they know it or not, what they're asking is like, so should I be doing bimodal IT? And what I think that phrase gets a bad rap, but I think kind of one of the things I think that's interesting in that question that they're getting to is, so how do I manage running all the old stuff and the new stuff at the same time, right? And I'm not going to switch over everything to a new methodology because that would be terrible, right? And I'm not going to switch over the people. So like I've almost, maybe this isn't true, but I've got like two different ways of living that I'm trying to do at once, and like that's a management challenge. And I don't know what have you seen people doing where they're still running all those COBOL applications on a mainframe, which I have a whole other separate line of questions. I think how I was talking about how it's interesting to think about how technology solves cultural problems or can solve cultural problems. It's an interesting thought exercise to think about, does COBOL on a mainframe cause problems, or is it neutral, right? Like the fact that you're running COBOL on a mainframe, is that causing you culture problems, or could it just as easily solve them? We can think about that at some other point. But like, if I'm managing all these old legacy things in the way of operating, then I'm trying to do things in a new way. Like, how are people managing doing those two things at once?
I think the idea is that we could just select any mainframe, do some work, and then replace it overnight is kind of an illusion. It's extremely tough to replace something that was crafted with love for over dozens and dozens of years, and to really replace it completely, to have it rewritten. Many of those projects I've seen were failing because they just tried to do that in particular, to just try to rewrite it, to outsource it to maybe some other countries, not understanding also the background of the application, and try to come to a point where they just switch from the one to the other. The only true solution I've seen working was following something like a strangler pattern and go a very progressive work, focusing on just one thing, trying to understand where could we start, what is the most painful thing we have today in this huge application, on start to better understand this feature, what is the problem, to then start to rewrite it, to rebuild it, on building using some cloud native patterns, some microservices patterns, to just bridge the old and the new world. We have tons of possibility to do those. Something I found really funny at the beginning was those anti-corruption layer, to avoid to corrupt the model of your new application by the model, if you will, of the existing mainframes that is a little bit corrupted, things like that, and then go progressively, step by step, remove features from the existing mainframe and replace them step by step, adopting this new mindset, this new way of working. And at the end, when you do that, you are developing, refactoring, redeveloping your application the same way you would develop from scratch a new application, using the same extreme programming, lean product management, on user-centric design methodologies. And from this perspective, step by step, replace the old one. And to a certain point, typically you could then, when you're advanced enough, completely replace part of the mainframe, disable supports of it step by step. On at the end, after a couple of years, a couple of months, then fully have it replaced.
It kind of driving what you're talking about there is constantly, figuring out what's not only what's valuable to do, but like why you would want to replace something, right? Like if something's working, you probably shouldn't mess around with it, unless the reason you want to replace it is, I don't know, to introduce the ability to have more frequent changes in the software, or to reduce costs, or to make it scale up or something, right? But it's almost like, there's that old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And it's just sort of like, always understand what the criteria for broke is, and don't just assume that the criteria for broke is like it's old or whatever, right? Like, make sure that you're spending your time well there. Well, before we wrap up, well, one, just a comment, like, I was asking like why we have these short cycles, and again, it's fun to talk with people because it creates these new ways of thinking about things in my head. Boy, that was a truism right there from having a liberal arts education. But it is, you can use time boxing as an artificial urgency, and an urgency in a good way. That, like, I remember I was at an event where our CEO Pat Gelsinger was there. And he gave one comment. He I forget what question he was answering, but he was advising some CIO types about how to, like, do digital transformation stuff and kind of motivate people to do it. And he had a good framing for it, which is like, you should always run in the yellow, right? Like, and by yellow, I mean like red, yellow, green. Like, green, everything is cool, and red is like, terrible. But like, if you ever sort of relax enough, you run in the green, then like you're not really motivated to keep learning and improving, and you don't want to be in the red. Don't do that. And so, like, you should sort of always be like in a cautious sort of yellow state of doing things. And the old I forget which was it, Andy Grove is like, you should always be paranoid, and this is like management by bravado to a certain extent. But like, I think it's always important to have that external urgency kind of like driving you doing something. And time is a good urgency to have something. It really, as you said, it makes you focus on stuff and kind of cut away doing things. Like, I remember I was just watching the Spring One talk. I forget who it was, but one of our customers who was talking was saying, like, we had all these big ambitions, but we only had like four weeks, so we just did this one thing. Right. And it was a good example of like kind of what we keep talking about is like, just like start, right? Like, as long as you have like a learning adaptive mindset, and you don't want to just be like, I don't know if y'all had this in France growing up, but we had this Kool-Aid man who would just like crash through a wall. So you don't want to just like be crashing through things. You want to kind of be like learning as you crash through walls. But it's good to time box yourself. All right. Well, before we wrap up, I have a few inane questions I want to ask you. I always like doing inane things. Usually I do it at the beginning. But so where did you grow up, first of all?
I grew up in Alsace, so it's in France. A lot of people in France think it's part of Germany, but it's really part of France. It's at the border between Germany and France, at the north of Alsace. Yeah.
So I'm always curious what accents sound like in other languages, right? So, for example, I know, being a native American English speaker, I know what it sounds like for a Spanish person to speak English, or for yourself, a French person to speak English. What does it sound like for like an American person to speak French? Like if you were to characterize it, like, what are the sounds that they make, right? Like that it's kind of, you can tell, because like you can usually like they do this here in Amsterdam, like they can hear you trying to speak Dutch, and instantly they'll peg you. They'll be like, boom, you speak English. And so they kind of like, there's certain sounds that you hear, and you must think like, oh, this is an American, no matter how much they're trying to like speak French.
It's kind of tough for me to say, because when I'm speaking French, even if it's my mother tongue, I started a couple of years to get some compliments how good my French is. People not realizing that.
So you have an accent.
I also have a weird accent because I'm
Yeah.
spending too much time in Germany, probably ending not being able to speak properly English, French, and German, just mixing all that.
Yeah. It's like how the Germans can tell if you're from Switzerland or not, based on the way that you speak German. Yeah. Huh.
But for an American speaking French or speaking English, is really tough to describe. It's I would say a little bit louder than the traditional way of speaking French. A little bit more round, a little more bold.
Yeah.
On most of the time, we always hear the same things like Champs-Élysées, baguette. On
Uh-huh.
there are a couple of La Tour Eiffel. It's probably like in many other languages. There are
Yeah,
10, 12 words you hear most of the time.
no,
On
exactly. That would be
this,
that would be the way to explore it, is to have like five common words, right? And kind of listen to how various people say it, because yeah, no, the two that you identified, right? Like I was just listening to a podcast earlier, and they said baguette several times. Even I probably say it in it, but that would be a good indication. Like I always feel like, I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I always feel like I took French for like a couple of years in high school, I think. But there's definitely, like you're saying, there's a lot more softness to French than there is to like English. Like English is a very like hard language. There's a lot of like to it, like, hitting things. Whereas like I remember in my head, like I used to think like when I'm speaking French, I need to remember just to kind of like trail off at the end of the word. Like there's all these letters at the end, and just like kind of ignore them, right? Like just like coast right through it. Whereas in like English, leaving letters off the end of a word is like a very distinctive like country way of talking, right? To be like, I'm fixing to go do something instead of fixing. Whereas like I think in anyways, but it is, and so I would imagine a lot of English speakers who are trying to pronounce French, they emphasize these sounds at the end of the word that you're not supposed to emphasize, and it comes off as sounding weird.
I'm a huge fan of. Have you seen this video of Julie and Julia with Julia Childs, this American
Right.
cook who went in France on? She discovered the French gastronomy and
Yeah.
started herself to. And to me, she's impersonating the way American people are talking when they try to speak French,
Right.
being very enthusiastic, have a lot of energy, bouffe bourguignon. And at the same time, I think American people for French are easier to understand than when they speak English than UK English or people from other part of the world. I think there is a high potential to work very well in terms of communication with French and German people.
Yeah. And phone got all set up. I mean, got all upset. So last thing, and then we can wrap up. Am I causing you to be late to another meeting? I forgot to ask that.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, so related. What do the Germans tell you sound like when you speak German? Like what accent does a French speaker bring to speaking German?
I think having a French accent in Germany is always very positive. It's the language of love, and people can't stop saying how nice it sounds to speak French in comparison with many other accents, and how romantic it is, and how musical the French pronunciation is.
Oh wow! So they have the full-on French
Absolutely,
stereotype going there.
It's
amazing.
I was considering for a while giving French pronunciation courses to other people because it's well liked there.
That would be that's always a popular YouTube video series, is how to say things. I had to look up. My daughter wanted to be. They had to dress up. They got the chance to be historical figures today at school, and so she wanted to be Frida Kahlo, and I had to look up how to pronounce that, just because like I wanted to make sure she pronounced it correctly. And then in looking that up, this is. I was like language stuff a lot. Like in looking that up, I was like, being from Texas, I know the sound of Spanish pretty well. I don't speak it well at all, but like I was thinking like, Kahlo, that's not Spanish. Like, and then it made me realize that like, I don't think the letter K exists in Spanish. And so like, I mean, of course it exists, right? Because it's a modern global language that's absorbed all sorts of things. But I went to go look it up, and like, it was basically like, yeah, the letter K is not like a natural letter in Spanish, right? They use QU, like quesadilla or queso or cuando, or all these things, and it was Kahlo is I think her father came over from the Weimar days or something. It's a German name, and it is it's to use another K sound. It's crazy. but you could get it. You should get into that thing of like how to pronounce things, and you can just have the YouTube video that's like baguette, No, it's not baguette. It's you,
A big difficult ones in French are words with those nosy sounds like orange.
ah, yeah, 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 yeah.
Germans say orange, or there are, I think,
Or even
five or
worse, it's they're a customer of
croissant.
ours, which I mention every now and then, and so I'm like, as we would say, orange, or orange, if you'll
Mm.
pardon my accent, but it's yeah, yeah, and then there's y'all don't have the y'all don't have that glottally G thing like here in Dutch they have goed. Like that's a sound that like somehow has been ironed out. I think once you get
Mm.
you get west of Germany and then south of the Netherlands, there's no more sound. Like somehow that got ironed out. It's
Yeah.
that's a difficult one.
But it appears again in Bayern, which is in the other south part of Germany. So interesting to see how those things are evolving and taking over from one language to the other or not. Everyone pretending being the original one of having the right pronunciation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Wow, I think I have mentally exhausted myself skipping around on all these topics, so that's very satisfying. All right, well, thanks for being on. It was fun. I think
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to summarize, just I think you should, if you want to modernize stuff, you should figure out why you want to do it and what your motivations are. And if you don't know that, then figure that out first. And then you know, Americans trying to speak French are easier than other people trying to figure out what they're saying. So that's nice. And the Germans, they love French culture. They're all about
Definitely.
it. That's right. And I should learn how to pronounce Dutch better since I live here. Well, if people wanted to like check up on you and in Twitter, it doesn't look like you update that extremely frequently from what I was
Absolutely.
saying. But where would you send people if they want to see see what you're up to and things like that?
I would just send them to LinkedIn, reach out to me, or to Twitter. Yeah, I'm not very present on the social media, but I'm always glad to have a message over LinkedIn or just per mail at on my work address, so to say.
Sounds good. All right. Well, with that, we'll see everyone next time.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Have a great day.
Yeah, it was fun.